resource section, I provide a link to the AJAX in Plugins Codex page. This page goes over how to use AJAX in plugins. Using AJAX on the front end requires a little work. The first thing we need to do is prepare the data. I'm inside my recipe template file. As you can see, the rating is placed at the very bottom of the template. We created this div with the class rateIt. I also gave it an ID called recipe_rating. We'll need this as a reference. I also added this attribute called data/rateIt/resettable and set its value to false. This will prevent the user from resetting their rating. All of this information can be found on the documentation page of the plugin. The last attribute I created is called data-RID. This will contain the ID of the current post. Taking a closer look, you'll notice I made this into a placeholder. Inside our filter, I search for this string and then replace it with the actual ID. Let's test this really quick. You should see 5 stars and be able to rate this recipe. This works almost perfect. As you can see, you're able to change your rating. We don't want this. We want the rating to be set after the user has done so. We'll do this in our JS file. I'm going to select the div, and then I'm going to bind an event called rated. This event is called when the user rates a recipe. Inside the function, we can use this object to reference our div. I'm going to select our div again and call it the rateIt method. This method allows us to change the properties. I'm going to change the read-only property to true. This will prevent the user from changing their rating after rating a recipe. Let's create an object called formObj. We're going to send this object when we make an AJAX request. There's only one property we must define, which is the action property. WordPress will use this to determine what function to execute when it receives an AJAX request. I'm going to set this to r_rate_recipe. Next, I'm going to create a rid property and set its value to the rid attribute. The last property we want to define is the rating itself. To grab the rating, we can use the rateIt method and pass in value. This will return the rating. Before I send this object, I want to log this object in the console and confirm all properties are set. Rate this recipe and check the console for our object. You also shouldn't be able to re-rate this recipe. After confirming both, we can now send an AJAX request. The WordPress admin provides a variable for the AJAX URL. In the front end, we're not so lucky. We actually have to generate the URL ourselves. It's pretty easy though. Inside the enqueue file, we're going to use a function called wp_localize_script. This function is used for providing translated strings to our JS files. Despite this, WordPress actually recommends you use this function for also providing a URL to its AJAX page handler. The first parameter is which file will be receiving the translations/URLs. Set this to r_main, since this is the file that we're using to send AJAX requests. Next up is the name of the object we can use for referencing the values. I'm going to set this recipe_obj. The last parameter is an array of values. We only need to create one value, and this is the AJAX_URL. You can name this whatever you want, by the way. The value of this key will be the URL returned by the admin_URL function. This function has one optional parameter, which is the path relative to the WordPress admin URL. I'm going to pass in admin-ajax.php. This is the path that should always handle your AJAX requests. If we take a look at our folder structure, you can actually find this file inside the wp-admin folder. Now we can send an AJAX request. Using jQuery's post method, we'll send an AJAX request to the URL we generated. Remember, the recipe underscore obj is the name we used in the second parameter of the localize function. This object will contain all of our array's value. The property we want to access is the AJAX underscore URL property. Next, we want to send the form obj, and then we'll create the function that will handle the response. The data argument is a variable that will contain the response body. I'm simply going to log this inside our console. The last thing we need to do is actually tell WordPress about this AJAX request so we can handle it properly. From the plugin file, we're going to use an action hook called wp_AJAX. Let's take a look at this hook by viewing its codex page. I provide a link to this in the resources section of this lecture. The hook starts with wp_AJAX, followed by the name of the action. This was set in our form obj object. So our action hook should be called wp_AJAX_r_rate_recipe. The name of the function we want to execute is r_rate_recipe. You can name this whatever you want. You don't have to name it after the action. Alright, now create a file in the process folder called rate-recipe.php and define the function in here. Make sure to include it with the plugin file. Inside the function, I'm going to output the post data. Let's try using our rating system now. If we did everything right, we should see our PHP post data being outputted into the console like so. Perfect. There's one last thing I want to do before we move on to processing the rating. Back inside the main plugin file, I'm going to copy the AJAX hook again and paste it below. I'm going to change wp_AJAX to wp_AJAX_NOPRIV. The difference between these two is that the nopriv version will also process AJAX requests from users who are not logged in. We want our guests to be able to rate our recipes as well. This step is optional and is up to you whether you believe guests should be able to make AJAX requests. You don't have to worry about both of these functions executing, as WordPress is smart enough to tell which one to use depending on the user.